Okay, Anna, why don't you start with your update while I get my audio figured out here? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, there we go. Everybody's here now. All right. Well, I guess the updates for this week are pretty obvious. We've had a lot of different things go on. We obviously have had the outbreak of a unforeseen and ugly and misreported attack on Iran by U.S. forces. The U.S., of course, is not America. This is not our country at war with Iran. This is a foreign British territorial subcontractor, a federal subcontractor of the American government, acting out of school and trying to claim that their actions are in defense of this country, when obviously what's going on over there doesn't have anything to do with us. That's just an excuse so that they can charge off their expenses to us. And so the modus operandi of these federal subcontractors, which are in the business of providing mercenary services, is to get paid for those mercenary services by other governments, in this case, Israel, Britain, and the Roman municipal government. They're paying the USA Inc. to go over there and do this. But then the USA Inc. is claiming that this is something necessary for the defense of our country, and they're charging off all their expenses for this to us. Now, whether or not they're also charging their clients for their expenses and double dipping, who knows? What we do know is that they're charging us for their warmongering and their profiteering engagements for other governments. We also know that they are lying by omission to our service members, and they're using them as cheap mercenary forces when the men and women who've signed on for tours of duty with the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army and the Coast Guard and all the other services are given no full disclosure about this. They sign up, innocent as the flowers in May, thinking that they are defending their country. And instead, they're being signed into a very distinctly commercial mercenary service, and they're being used as mercenaries without their knowledge or consent. And certainly, if they knew, they would be charging a lot more for those services. So although this gives the service company a competitive advantage in the world economy and the world service sector for mercenary services, that they can provide top quality mercenaries armed to the teeth with all of the latest equipment for cheap, it also means that we get stuck with the bill when they go on an assignment like this for other interests, other governments, even oil companies. So this is a situation that is just part and parcel of the gross corruption, misrepresentation, and fraud that has engulfed our country over the past 165 years. And people don't like to imagine that it's been going on for that long, but it has indeed been 165 years of this kind of corruption that has taken place right under our noses. And we haven't objected. We didn't know. We weren't told. And I guess in that little snippet right there, we weren't told, sums up the entire passion play, the entire drama that we've been immersed in, because both of our federal subcontractors that survived the quote-unquote American Civil War mercenary conflict should have told us, the American public, what was going on. Both the popes in their offices, the Roman pontiff, and the generals who inherited the responsibility that was foisted off on them by Abraham Lincoln, owed us good faith service. And that good faith service provision in their service contract obligated them both then and now to fully disclose the situation and to assist their employers in dealing with it. If that had been done by Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman and the rest of the party hardies coming out of the Civil War, we would not be in the situation that we're in today. However, these men kept their mouths shut and took advantage of the situation and took advantage of their employers, basically lied about the entire situation, pretended that our government was absent in interregnum, missing, no idea where it went, when clearly and plainly, and according to Lincoln's own words, was vested in the people of this country. Now, not everyone understood the specific meaning of people that was enshrined in the preamble of the constitutions, all three federal constitutions. Because it wasn't just the living people that we think of, it was the people with a capital P, meaning the lawful persons of the land jurisdiction of this country, who were state citizens, not federal citizens, who signed the constitutional service contracts and who are both enabled and ultimately obligated to enforce those contracts. Now, nobody can interfere with the contractual process. That includes the governments who are the principals operating the federal subcontractors that are vendors of services. To put this absolutely square and right in your minds, know that the British territorial subcontractor operating as the United States of America Incorporated, and now we even have another version, the United States of America LLC in operation, are British Crown corporations, and they are basically under the control of the British government. The employees of that federal subcontractor, which is all of the defense contractors and the armed forces branches, get their paychecks processed by a foreign paymaster, which is SERCO, S-E-R-C-O, all capital letters, a municipal corporation owned and operated by the British municipal government. And so we have a situation where our armed forces have been paid, objectively paid, by a foreign government. Now, how such a situation could occur and be sustained with any credibility for any length of time is a question that will forever remain one that I wish to have answered. And yet there is no credible reason, there is no credible explanation of how generations of generals at the staff level of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have taken it for granted that a British corporation was operating as their paymaster. Such a situation should never rationally occur, ever. The process, the paymaster role of a sovereign country and nation for their own armed forces is a responsibility that logically only that sovereign nation can undertake. And the armed forces themselves should have sense enough to realize that, and to realize that the British government was acting as an interloper, a usurper, and was leveraging a middleman position by inserting itself as the paymaster of our armed forces. This ridiculous situation has continued ever since the Civil War. So, we have the Brits doing what the Brits do best, leveraging a middleman position for themselves by acting as paymasters of our armed services, giving the armed services the idea that their employers are British, when in fact their actual employers are the Americans, the public, us. Every penny extracted for their equipment, for their uniforms, for their support in the field, for their weaponry, all of it comes out of our hides. And it is extracted by the British government using lawfare, which is essentially criminal personage, barratry, and aggravated identity theft, resulting in illegal confiscation of private property under false legal pretenses. And they've been getting away with this for a century and a half and more. This sickening situation has been brought to the attention of the world and to the Trump administration and to the municipal government subcontractors and to all of the authorities that are responsible for riding herd on this sort of thing and making sure it doesn't happen. They have all failed. This is an institutional failure and a contractual failure and a breach of trust on absolutely historic levels. So, whether people like to look at this and cynically laugh and say, oh boy, those Americans are really stupid, really trusting, they deserve to get reamed, they deserve to be fleeced, or you want to look at it in terms of, here are these innocent, faithful, wonderful people who put their faith in what they thought was their government and were betrayed, utterly betrayed in breach of contract and in breach of trust by public servants, by public employees that they trusted and that they depended upon to fully disclose and to operate in a fair and above-board manner based on the good faith service clause written into their service contract over 200 years ago. That we have to wake up and deal with the fact that we have been completely defrauded, denigrated, and dishonored by our own public employees is a very bitter pill to swallow. That is nonetheless the situation that we face. And this is not the first time in history that this has happened. King Louis of France encountered the same exact situation during the French Revolution. He and his queen, Marie Antoinette, were blissfully unaware of the grotesque amounts of corruption and fraud and extreme abuse of power that was being exercised in their names by an entire huge, bloated French government bureaucracy. There, the public employees defrauded the French kingdom. Here, the public employees defrauded the entire sovereign nation, represented by 50 sovereign nations, each of which were systematically undermined, raided, pillaged, plundered, and suborned for 6 generations. And here we are. The people responsible for this, the bankers, who had to wink and turn a blind eye because they knew damned well that the United States of America Incorporated was not the same as the United States of America Unincorporated, yet they winked and they turned a blind eye and they let the British territorial subcontractors have access to our credit. The bankers knew better, but they colluded with the British territorial usurpers to allow these pretenders to step into our identity, to steal our identity at a national level and access our credit. That is the crime and the sin of the bankers, and most especially the central bankers. As you found out this week, if you've been following along with the articles that have been sent out, the 2008 boondoggle was even worse than what was described as the TARP bailout and the trillions of dollars that were wasted right away by the government. It was actually far worse, because it wasn't 9 trillion. It was 3.5 quadrillion that was just absolutely squandered by the central banks, who were handing out money like it was the last great party on earth to all of the commercial banks, and especially the tech corporations, and whoever they wanted to benefit. And the way that they did this is that they just arbitrarily expanded the credit being represented by government debt. The vehicle that they used to do this was the Federal Reserve note, which was illegal and unlawful to begin with, because the Federal Reserve note was an exchange, a legal tender exchange currency that was a domestic exchange currency and couldn't be anything else, because at the time of its demise in 2007, it was being backed by silver to the extent that it still existed. Now, this is something that most people don't know either, is that there was the Federal Reserve, and then there was the Federal Reserve System, which was a trademarked and separate entity that actually printed up the Federal Reserve notes and distributed them. So the Federal Reserve System was bankrupted. It was teetering on the brink for years, right? Because they just kept expanding and printing more and more and more and more Federal Reserve notes, even when they had exhausted their gold reserves backing the Federal Reserve notes. And just to give you a reference point, some of you are old enough to remember when 𝗨 de Gaulle, the president of France, demanded that the French exchanges be answered in gold. And there was a big stink at the time. I think it was 1963 or something, right around that period, when de Gaulle was demanding payment in gold for anything French. And then that was followed by the Germans, and the rest of the parties in Western Europe demanded everything in gold, because that is what had been provided for in the Bretton Woods Agreement. Well, gold and silver are the international currencies and always have been. That is what was provided for in the Bretton Woods Agreement, because at the end of the Second World War, America was basically the only one with gold reserves substantive enough and had enough gold reserves to rebuild Asia and Europe. But they were lowballing the value of that gold at $35 an ounce. So this was a bad deal from the get-go. Bretton Woods was a means by which America was defrauded and robbed by the European and Asian powers that were getting this $35 an ounce deal from the generals. And that's where our gold got siphoned away, was paying for their rebuilding using our gold. All of this was done without the knowledge and without the authority or permission of the actual owners of that gold, the American public. We were never told. We were never asked. The central banks responsible just winked, turned a blind eye, and continued to play footsie with the British territorial government and the generals that were working for, or so they thought, working for that British territorial government. So there's no point in going to Fort Knox, folks. These private, foreign, commercial banks, their officers and their employees have stolen us absolutely blind. Under conditions of non-disclosure and deceit. This means that they're criminals. This means that they are in violation of their service contracts, known as the Constitution of the United States of America and the Constitution of the United States, to which the original principles and all successors are bound, and which they readily play upon as an excuse for their activities and charges. So we have a situation here, folks, and it's not a pleasant or pretty one. These people are guilty. These institutions are guilty. The central banks are especially responsible for the situation that we all find ourselves in. Most especially, the Bank for International Settlements is responsible for the situation that we all find ourselves in, because they were meant to provide oversight and discipline over the, I believe it's now 63 central bank members. Among these central banks, which remember, were set up to control commodities. And this is a fact that most people are not aware of either. Central banks are commodity rigging devices. They're institutions which have a legalized ability to rig commodities of all kinds. Now, what we think of when we think of banks and commodities, we think of credit instruments being commodities. For example, Federal Reserve notes are credit commodities. We think about money as a commodity. We think about silver dollars and gold eagles as being commodities, right? These are physical products that are produced by government mints, and they are closely controlled, and they are often stockpiled, commandeered, and otherwise manipulated by central banks. So the chief commodity that the central banks are known for manipulating and controlling are currencies, both credit and actual monetary assets. This is taken for granted because that is the nature of a central bank system. We're never taught anything about this in school. This is something that you have to learn by ferreting it out yourself. You are left adrift, alone, and ignorant about economics, about banking, about commodity rigging that's legalized, about central banks, about the difference between maritime commercial banks and land-based commercial banks. All of this is left to you to be discovered because you, as an American, are never given full disclosure about anything that affects your economy, your money, and your world. The U.S. Army, the British Territorial U.S. Army, has made sure to create a fishbowl and has subjected this entire country to a kind of economic quarantine. They have weaponized the Federal Reserve note, a domestic legal tender that was created out of thin air by the Congress in 1933, or actually was weaponized in 1933 by the U.S. Congress. And they have kept this as a monopolized domestic market where nothing could be bought or sold except by barter or by Federal Reserve note exchanges. That was it. We have been kept in the same sense that a slave is kept, or that a captive is kept. We have not been able to trade freely. We have not been able to exercise our economic freedom or our financial freedom at all. We have been subjected to what I call the company store model. Back in the 19th century, it was commonplace for mining operations especially, and those especially in the western states, to set up a mine complex somewhere way far away from civilization, often building private railroad segments to reach the mine. And the workers would all go out to the mine and would be isolated out there and dependent on supplies that the mining company that employed them brought in and sold to the miners at the company store. This is what I'm talking about when I say that our country has been run according to the company store model for 160 years. The only thing that you can buy in the company store is what the company allows and what the company brings in. And you have to pay the price that the company charges because it's a sole source monopoly. And on top of that, the only way that you can buy anything at the company store is by using special scrip or vouchers or coupons, which are, again, issued by the company in lieu of real wages. Those of you who are a little bit more attuned to these subjects will have no problem whatsoever recognizing the Federal Reserve note as a scrip. Those of you who have served in base camps overseas are also familiar with this principle being used by the military in rather remote forward bases. Those of you who have watched MASH on television, the series MASH, recall that the personnel at the MASH unit were regularly called upon to exchange their scrip. This was internal money, vouchers, coupons that were issued to the personnel at MASH. And this was common throughout all of the service industries and base encampments all over the world, so that they could go and buy things like toothpaste at the company store. Now, they didn't call it a company store, they called it the PX. But it's the same principle all throughout. Our entire country has been run like this, and we have been the involuntary workers, the slaves, those subjected to peonage, those stuck living and buying everything from the company store using company-issued scrip, the Federal Reserve notes. Are you beginning to see this? Are you beginning to understand what's been done to you and to your country by your employees? Especially the employees in the military, which somehow never understood that we are their actual employers. Or if they understood, they were crooked and didn't care, and just thought, well, we have a means to extract wealth from them. We have a means of extracting natural resources from them. So even though we never conquered them in any actual war, and even though what gave rise to the whole situation was an illegal mercenary conflict, we're just going to continue to occupy this country in the name of the Republic, the name of the public. And continue to confiscate their property illegally, to subject them to foreign law, and to occupy their country under the pretense that we are their own dear sweet military, when in fact we're operating as a military directed by a foreign power. That is, quote unquote, the British Empire. Now, I've been bringing you this bad news for a long time. I've been telling it to you in bits and pieces, here and there, different aspects of our history that all, in the end, funnel down to this final denouement. And our entire world has been gradually corrupted and subjected to this institutionalized criminality, evil, and falsehood. Right now, the USA Inc. has been hired by Israel, Britain, and elements of the Roman civil government to attack Iran. Iran did nothing to deserve this. They have been, in the course of years, conducting a lot of research into a lot of physics topics. This is something that a lot of you there in the audience tonight don't know. But Iran has always had some of the top mathematicians and top scientists in the world. And they are especially talented in the realm of mathematics and physics. This is partially a result of a long-term interest in the cosmos, in measurement, and in exact mathematical language and representation of mathematical principles. Their Persian ancestors used a mathematical system far superior to the Greek and Roman system that we use. Our system would be unworkable if it had not borrowed mathematical signs, symbols, principles, and ideas from Hindu math, which was actually borrowing from Persian math. And so I was fortunate as a young woman to study with a Hindu mathematician who opened up my eyes to the beauties of Persian mathematics. This lousy criminal excuse for a government that we have allowed to suborn, commandeer, enslave, and subject us to peonage while living off of our largesse has not wanted us to become acquainted with Iran. They haven't wanted us to become familiar with Iranian science. They haven't wanted us to talk to Iranian mathematicians, because if we did, we would know that what our mathematics represents is merely an approximation of truth, while Persian Iranian mathematics is exact. It's precise. No more dividing it out to the 10th place and calling it good. We would find out that Iranian physics is superior to our own. We would realize that such vaunted sacred cows as Einstein's special theory of relativity and Clerk Maxwell's electrical calculations are actually very crude and incomplete, and that, in fact, in terms of basic math and physics and science, we lag far behind the Persian Iranian system. So once again, the phobia about Iran isn't really based on religion. It's based on keeping us ignorant, because our ignorance keeps us enslaved. And that's exactly where the monsters in charge of this heinous institutionalized fraud against America and against Americans want us to be. So There is one reason why the Defense Department especially doesn't want us hobnobbing with the Iranian scientists. That's why they want to bomb the Iranian scientists into oblivion. And they want to use the excuse that the Iranian scientists are developing the nuclear bomb. Well, so what? Pakistan has a nuclear bomb. India has a nuclear bomb. India not only has a nuclear bomb, they have missiles that are competent to deliver their payloads virtually anywhere they want. How's that for thought? We, meanwhile, are slumbering along despite having paid trillions of dollars worth of everything that we have, our labor, our lives, our homes, our businesses, for one, protection, and two, technological supremacy that we don't have. We've got a lot of it, but we don't have quality. And that's because our math and science is flawed. Our physics lags behind, and the application is frankly very shoddy. But we are charged better than top dollar prices for everything that the quote unquote DoD produces or does. So here we are, attacking Iran, full well knowing that they don't have a nuclear weapon, full well knowing that except for localized missiles, they don't have any great amount of strategic defense or armament. Going in there, pounding the hell out of them, and trying to make this into some glorious, patriotic thing, when in fact it's a cheap, ugly, mercenary contract for evil men to do evil things. The Iranian ambassador to the UN pointed out that in pursuing nuclear research of any kind, whether it's for a bomb or anything else, Iran is merely exercising its guaranteed rights as a sovereign nation, guaranteed by the United Nations Charter to all members. And here's Donald Trump. I can only think of Slim Pickens writing the bomb down in Dr. Strangelove. Creating this horrendous mess, killing only God knows how many innocent people, including Americans. Over what? Well, obviously, oil and oil prices. When the Straits of Hormuz close down, oil prices skyrocket, so big oil gets a nice fat dollop landed on their plate. Score one. Any kind of occupation of Iran opens up the possibility that the perpetrators will be able to steal Iranian oil just as they stole Iraqi oil, or will be able to otherwise manipulate and control the flow of oil, the transport monopoly that they could possibly establish as a result of this. Or maybe it's just simply to be able to redirect Iranian oil to their new planned oil and gas refineries that are being planned for the Israeli sector of the coast, where they have established, already laid out the docking and pipeline facilities to have an oil refinery of major proportions right there in the Middle East, from which they can supply Europe and potentially could also supply the Eastern African countries and India. So you see, this is not about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Iran has every right to have a nuclear weapon. Iran has every right to study anything it wants to study. And it's no skin off Donald Trump's nose, and it's not the king's business. And if the United Nations doesn't stand up against this, then the United Nations proves itself completely inconsequential, having no role to play, having no oversight authority of any kind, and being stuck just sitting there watching, while Donald Trump very arbitrarily decides, well, I've talked enough. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to violate Iranian sovereignty. I'm going to kick the hell out of them, show them who's boss, and be a bully and get paid as a mercenary, as a corporate subcontractor, as a vendor of mercenary services by Israel and Britain and Rome to do their dirty work. Really has nothing to do with us. And then I'm going to come back home and pat myself on the back and charge the Americans for defending them. From what? From our own stupidity? We need to defend ourselves from our own stupidity. The reason that I issued the international public notice notifying the entire world that this was taking place apart from our country is that our Constitution, all of them, all three federal constitutions, require that our Congress, the American Congress, declares anything approaching a war. We declare war. Our federal subcontractors do not declare war for us. Our foreign federal subcontractors have no war-making authority whatsoever. Their Congresses have no war-making authority whatsoever, apart from their own corporations' activities. So in order for there to be a war between our country and Iran, it requires a vote to declare war by our Congress and a formal declaration of war setting forth the reasons for it. None of that is in evidence. So let's discuss the office of Commander-in-Chief. Those of you who have served in the Navy, and I would assume most people just generally in the course of their lives, know that commander is a naval officer. Not even a particularly senior naval officer. Pretty much the level of a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And so Donald Trump is commander-in-chief of what? Naval units. These foreign corporations are styled as ships made of paper. They are vessels, sometimes described as special purpose vessels. And he is the President of the United States of America Incorporated. Exactly such a vessel of which he is the commander-in-chief, in the same way that a commander at sea may be in charge of other vessels. If you have wondered how Donald Trump could continue to be quote-unquote president during the Biden administration, wonder no longer. He continued to be the president of the USA Incorporated, even though he was no longer recognized as president of the United States, or anything acting as successor to the United States. So now let's talk about capitals. Let's talk about Washington, D.C., so everybody finally understands that. You have been taught correctly that our American government contracted for certain essential government services to be provided by 3 different contractors, vendors of services, operating in separate international jurisdictions. The federal government has no powers at the national level whatsoever. The federal government is composed entirely of services and vendors operating in international jurisdictions. Okay? So when it came time and we were apportioning out these different services that we wanted to receive from these vendors, and we were parceling out the enumerated powers, allowing them to provide these services for us, we also created the federal capital and the District of Columbia. Now, there's a great deal of ignorance and many assumptions about this. So let's clear it up right here and now tonight. The District of Columbia is not and has never been a state of the Union. It's a foreign enclave plopped down on our eastern seaboard as a staging ground and place where our foreign federal subcontractors could conduct their business and have their offices and establish their homes. It is foreign. If Vladimir Putin were to take 5 of his submarines and deploy an entire payload of nuclear weapons against the District of Columbia tonight, if he were to blow it off the face of the planet like a pockmark, a wart, or a pustule, it would be of no concern to us. If they had precise enough targeting, it wouldn't even violate our airspace. That's how foreign the District of Columbia really is with respect to our states of the Union. The absolute only thing that is associating the District of Columbia with any of our states of the Union is that Virginia and Maryland each gave up a portion of land and soil to the federal vendors under a permanent use permit. This means they don't have to renew this use permit every year. But it does mean that they have to continue to use the land for the stipulated purpose. That is all that continues to attach any state of the Union to the District of Columbia in any respect whatsoever. So this is a foreign enclave. It's an incursion into our country, into our space, onto our land and soil by foreign federal service vendors. That's what the District of Columbia actually and factually is, and what it has always been. And as for Washington, D.C., for those who are so completely lost about this subject, Washington, D.C. was established as what? The federal capital, as apart from our national capital. Our national capital is and was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, not Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was again set aside for the use and purposes of the federal subcontractors we hired to provide us with certain enumerated essential government services, period. Now, within the city of Washington, D.C., lies the municipality of Washington, D.C. The municipality of Washington, D.C. has been allowed to sprawl outside of its original intended boundary, which was enclosed within the city of Washington, D.C. by the boundary stones surrounding the Capitol building. Technically, the municipal government is contractually obligated to operate only within the boundary stones established around the Capitol. The fact that the British territorials have allowed the municipal government to sprawl outward and to even piggyback along with them into the states of the Union does not change the contract, does not give them freedom to ignore the contract. Okay, so the municipality of Washington, D.C. is a separate, international, independent city-state. Okay? And the District of Columbia and the city of Washington, D.C. surrounding it is again foreign enclave. This is a pattern that was established long ago by the Roman Catholic Church and their affiliates in the Roman civil government. You have the Holy See, you have Vatican City surrounding the Holy See, and outside that, you have the Italian government. What do you see in London? The same exact pattern. You have this very small enclave, the temple of the inner city of London. You have the inner city of London, Fleet Street, the bankers, the bar attorneys, all functioning within that foreign enclave. And then you have London, the city, and then you've got the rest of whatever, right? The same structure applies to the municipality at the center of the city of Washington, D.C. Technically, this tiny little area within the boundary stones surrounding the Capitol, the federal Capitol building. Then you have the city of Washington, D.C. surrounding the municipality. And then you have the District of Columbia surrounding all of that before you ever get to a State of the Union. So it's exactly the same concentric circle model in which you have a government within a government within a government. And this has taken place here on this country's land and soil, the same way it took place in London, the same way it took place with Vatican City, and you will even see it in New York. Because there you have the enclave of the United Nations, and then you have the municipality of New York City, NYC, and then you have New York City surrounding that. It's the same exact model. Now, the city of Washington, D.C. was supposed to be ruled over by a plenary oligarchy composed of the members of the Congress. Our American Republic Congress. Not the foreign vendors, not their Congresses. Our American Federal Republic Congress was made responsible for the government security and neutrality of the federal capital. So what happened after 1861, when everything went foobar and Mr. Lincoln took over, usurped against the actual people and the actual government, and created this situation where his British Territorial Congress took over that duty, quote unquote, because of the emergency. There was no emergency. Above and beyond all the scrapping and problems and irritations that the federal subcontractors had, there was always the American government, their employers, standing over all of them. So there was no emergency. They called it an emergency. They deceitfully described it as an emergency to excuse their own usurpation, lack of trust, breach of trust, failure to give good faith service, and other crimes. Anyway, the British Territorial Congress has been sitting in the seats that belong to our American Federal Congress, our American Federal Republic, for 165 years. They just usurped upon it. The American Federal Republic ceased to operate in 1861 because the organization that held its contract for services, the States of America, suffered a breakdown and could no longer conduct business because the entire Southern delegation walked out, leaving it without a quorum. So the actual holder of the Constitution for the United States of America was our Confederation of States, the one that was created in 1781. And our Confederation could not operate because a large enough number of the members left the Confederation, seceded from the Confederation, and went off to form their own confederation called the Confederate States of America. That's why they're called the Confederate States of America. It was states that broke out of the Confederation that was created under the Articles of Confederation and went off in the corner to form their own confederation. That's why Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States of America. Anyway, the Confederation broke in half. The original Confederation was left without a quorum to conduct business. Therefore, they could not oversee and run our American Federal Republic, which had been left in charge under delegated powers to do a number of duties that logically are land jurisdiction duties and would not ever be the province of foreign subcontractors, like running the U.S. Mint, for example, and issuing money. Anyway, this federal capital and the usurpations that went into this whole situation have been a traditional spiel by the Brits. They claimed that there was an emergency and Mr. Lincoln, their president, their British Territorial Corporation president, had to step in and name all of his friends and cronies to replace the members of Congress that left with the Southern delegation of the Confederation. So when all the Southerners walked out of the Confederation, they also left the American Federal Republic Congress, right? And Mr. Lincoln just arbitrarily stepped in and said, oh, gee, there's an emergency. I guess I have to name my friends and cronies to replace all these Southern delegates. So that's what he did. He brought in all his friends from Illinois and New York and all the places where he had good buddies. And he filled the states, the congressional delegation of the American Federal Republic with his friends and converted it into the British Territorial Congress. He grossly and without any disclosure to the American public or to the American Federation of States, pulled this sleight of hand in which he appeared to be a legitimate president, doing something that everyone assumed he could do. But in fact, he was usurping against the American federal government, the Federal Republic, and replacing it, unlawfully converting it into a British Territorial Congress. So there's the first act of usurpation and substitution by the Brits. They substituted their British Territorial Congress for the American Republic Federal Congress. Then in 1871, they sought to make this their permanent lash-up. And again, without disclosure to the American public, their actual employers, they latched on to all of the assets of the American Federal Republic, which prior to the war had been doing business as the United States. And they claimed to own all the assets of the Federal Republic and all the corporations that had been formed under the Federal Republic. This happened February 2nd, 1871. And it was one of the most singular acts of betrayal, breach of trust, and self-service, illegal latching, and fraud ever perpetuated against any country in history. So the Brits came in here, pretended to be us, took over our federal republic property and corporations, and began running everything as if they were us. They did the same thing at the state level. Prior to the Civil War, each one of the states had a state of state. North Carolina, for example, ran the state of North Carolina. This was an entity run by Carolina to conduct all the routine business that we expect to see a state of organization conducting. The difference was that prior to the Civil War, the state of North Carolina was indicated as an entity having a name that included the word "the" as part of its name. "The" was capitalized. After the Civil War, a new organization employing some of the former employees and some new employees came into being. It was simply called the State of North Carolina. But in this case, the word "the" was not part of the name and was not capitalized. That was the only change that was visible to the public. One definite article, capitalized or not. The second entity doing business as the State of North Carolina was British territorial. So the Brits snuck their state-of-state organization in and used it to commandeer and seize control of the resources of North Carolina, the state. And they took over administration of all the services that North Carolinians could expect from a state of state. They did the same thing throughout the country. And that's why you will see that throughout the country, new state-of-state constitutions were developed at this time. The assemblies were harassed without disclosure to create new state-of-state constitutions with nobody knowing why. They were just basically threatened and bullied into creating a new state-of-state constitution after the war. And so they did. And acting without full disclosure, they unwittingly allowed these British organizations to come in and commandeer the day-to-day administration and operation of their state-of-state functions. So that's the second big substitution scheme that the British territorial government, first under Lincoln and then under his successors, pulled off. The third big substitution was as a result of the February 2nd, 1871 action by the 𝗨.𝗬 Congress, claiming all of the property and corporations and chattels of the American Federal Republic. And that was another big substitution scheme and fraud by which they claimed to own and operate the Federal Republic. And now they're trying to solidify their position because their breach of trust, their bad faith, their criminality, their fraud has been brought forward before the international authorities. And Mr. Trump is trying to run an end run around all of that and establish a British substitute officially for the American Federal Republic. They want to bust their way in and take over and be successors officially to the Constitution for the United, with a small u, States of America, without the necessity or nicety of reconstructing the American Confederation of States, the States of America, that is, and without it being an American institution or organization at all. Once again, the Brits are attempting to usurp and substitute our institution, our subcontractor, for one of theirs. So all of this hoopla about the American Republic returning, it's not American. They're trying to foist off another substitution scheme. They're trying to bring in people who, whether they know it or not, are British subjects. Remember, all those ignorant people out in America land have been mischaracterized and misrepresented as British subjects, and they have done nothing to correct their status or reclaim their reversionary trust interest in their American infant descendant estate. And so they're running around with no provenance, no idea that they're doing anything wrong, thinking that they're the Americans, when in fact they're British subjects. And they're helping the Brits try to pull off this substitution scheme again in ignorance. They haven't been taught any better. They don't really know their history because their history was never taught to them in school. And that was deliberate. But now we know. The same thing pertains to public elections versus private corporate elections. We are all familiar with all the political phasmatisma, all the months of TV and radio ads, all of the candidates by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and whatever little smaller parties there may be. You know, you have the Green candidate, you have the Independent candidate, but principally you've just got two political parties in this country. And they pre-select every single candidate for every single office, from dog catcher to their own vaunted president of their incorporated service companies. They pre-select the candidates, which leaves the voters with a false choice between, as I put it in my article, my 𝗨𝗏𝗀𝗀 article this week, is a choice between two pre-selected candidates. It's a false choice. You don't really have any choice. You've only got the pre-selection to choose from. This is their way of keeping control. This is their way of making sure that no honest person actually serves in any office in their private corporation. This is also the function of the so-called Electoral College, to make sure that they maintain control of their private foreign corporations that have these government services contracts. But it doesn't take a lot of research to get back to a day when Americans knew that public offices were a matter of duty. They were a sacrifice of your personal time. They often, accepting a public office in this country often involved loss of income. Literally, men would step up and accept an office as a judge, or an office as a governor, or an office as a judge, a sheriff, whatever. They did so in a spirit of sacrifice and public service. They did it because they had to. Somebody had to. It was a duty of a self-governing nation to make the sacrifice and do the work, even though it often meant a lot of, extra work, a lot of irritation, taking a lot of guff from the public, a reduction in pay, other kinds of losses that were suffered because they couldn't work as a public official and at the same time give adequate attention to their own private affairs. It was a duty, folks. It was not a plum. It wasn't something that people competed for because it gave you influence, or because the paparazzi were going to follow you and take pictures of you, or because you were going to be able to schmooze with all these international leaders, or because you were going to get thousands, nay, millions of dollars by influencing who gets government contracts and who gets regulatory relaxations and exemptions. All that stuff is completely foreign to our American government. For an American, public office is a duty. It's a burden. It's something that has to be done because somebody has to grab the tow rope and shove, okay? It's not some sort of Hollywood glitz drama with all sorts of billions of dollars being spent on TV ads and radio ads and these little icon-like, billboards everywhere, and every kind of little trachka that can be thrown at a campaign. Here's your 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 pen. Here's your Richard M. Nixon poster. Here's your JFK button. All this crap is foreign to our government. It's completely foreign to our customs and traditions. Stop and think. Could a free people ever allow some private organization to pre-select their candidates for office? Why don't you just hand them the keys? You see how stupid this is? You see how ignorant we've been? You see how while we've been off living our lives, doing our thing, or at least trying to, despite the constant invasive, snooping, surveilling, coercive nastiness that we experience at the hands of our public employees every single day of our lives, despite that, we've been dutifully ignoring government. And in the course of ignoring government and entrusting it to somebody else's responsibility, we have become dependent. We've been subjected to peonage, and we have indeed been enslaved by our own public employees and by these foreign political parties that are actually lobbyist groups. These are lobbyists no different than the lobbyists that go to Washington, D.C. and plod from congressional office to congressional office on behalf of the Philip Morris, the big tobacco company, or those same lobbyists that are constantly wheeling and schmoozing with the members of Congress on behalf of the German pharmaceutical giant Bayer, or any of these other corporations, Microsoft, Palantir, BlackRock. They all have their lobbyist organizations lobbying members who are also lobbyists. Are you getting a clear view of this? The members of Congress representing the Democrats or the Republicans are lobbyists. So you have lobbyists lobbying lobbyists. And you have two breeds of pig surrounding the public trough. It does not matter if it's a Democratic pig or it's a Republican pig. Odds are that if it's a Democratic pig, it's going to be intent on buying votes with public money. And so they go to the public trough and they pull out as much as they can bite up and chew off and bring it back to their quote unquote constituents. And they promise everybody a free lunch and a chicken in every pot and welfare for everybody and free health care benefits. And oh, here's an Obama phone. Got the picture? And then you have this other breed of pig, another version of lobbyist, only they're lobbyists for big business. And they are called Republicans. Now, these pigs go up to the public trough, and what they're intent on is getting the bacon for their cronies in big business. They're there munching and growling and fighting for their share of the slop so that they can give favors to BlackRock, Palantir, and McDonnell Douglas, and, Raytheon. That's who they're representing. Do you notice that nobody is representing the actual public that actually pays for all of this? We don't have a political party. Joe Average American does not have a political lobby representing him. Not on the congressional roster in DC. Nowhere is there a political party representing the public interest. Let that sink in. We are supposed to be self-governing. We're supposed to be responsible for making our own decisions. We're supposed to fill our own public offices. We're supposed to hold our own public elections. We're supposed to be in control of this whole mess. And instead, we're sitting on the sidelines with our finger in the ear going, oh, well, I kind of liked what he had to say. Oh, but no, I like what he had to say better. And, these are the only choices in front of me. So I have to make a choice between Harry or Bill. And we're participating in these foreign elections for these lobbyists, foreign lobbyists, who are doing nothing but come in and steal from us the American people. How stupid is this? I ask you. We have been sitting on our duffs, and every day that we live, this panoply of insanity has been in front of our faces, and somehow we've managed to ignore all of it. We've ignored the takeover of our military. We've ignored the takeover of our states of states. We've ignored the takeover of the Federal Republic Congress. We've ignored the suppression of the Federation of States. We've ignored the suppression of the states themselves. We've slept through it all. And now we wake up and find ourselves as observers of the roiling madness, the violence, the criminality, the complete lack of control. Our sons and daughters used as cheap mercenaries. We're having these people in Washington pretend to represent us when in fact they represent lobbies, foreign lobbies for foreign citizens living here in our states of the Union. Talk about an immigration crisis. This is the real immigration crisis. We have bar attorneys who are self-admittedly esquires. Esquires, British subjects. Hello? We have somehow sat here on our rumps and watched Queen Elizabeth II take out her ceremonial sword and dub Colin Powell, Norman Schwarzkopf, President Herbert Walker Bush, Henry Kissinger, and we somehow thought that these men represented us, that they were part of our American government. Wake to hell up, America. And you need to do the same thing with Donald Trump. You need to step back and realize that the only presidential offices that exist that he could occupy are the presidencies of foreign, privately owned corporations. One that's a commercial corporation owned and operated under the auspices of the British Crown, and the other, a municipal corporation operated under the auspices of the Holy Roman Empire. There is no federal republic right now in operation. There is no American federal republic in operation. Therefore, no president of the American Federal Republic is possible. No such presidency has been filled. That office has been vacant since 1861. So the American Federal Republic has not been operating. It's been inoperable since 1861. And the only people that can restore the American Federal Republic are Americans, not British territorial subjects, not Donald Trump. The only people who can legitimately create an American Federal Republic are Americans who claim their American estate and political status. One of us. And even we would have to abide by the First Naturalization and Immigration Act that created a special political status known as a United States citizen. Now, I usually am talking about two different kinds of citizens. There's the 𝗨.𝗬𝗏C citizen, right? The British territorial citizenry. And there's the citizen of the United States, which is a municipal citizen, right? They all work for the government. But there was originally a third kind of federal citizen, and that was the Americans who worked for the original American Federal Republic. And they were called United States citizens, capital U, capital S, capital C. Written out in full, United States citizen. While the British territorials were capital U dot capital S dot capital C citizens. And the municipal citizens were relegated to being small c citizens of the United States. So if you're talking about actually resurrecting the American Federal Republic, which is the only republic that has ever existed, and therefore the only one to be restored, then we have to go through a rather lengthy process to populate it with United States citizens drawn from among the American people who are committed and determined enough to staff the American Federal Republic and adopt the citizenship represented as the United States citizen, which is a separate category that is defined under the First Naturalization and Immigration Act. Again, Americans born in one of the states of the Union has their own nationality and their own free-born, free will status. Those who actually staffed the American Federal Republic had to make a serious commitment requiring a lengthy process to become a citizen of the American Federal Republic, that is, to be an employee of the American Federal Republic government. And all of that is laid out in the First Naturalization and Immigration Act as it had to be in order for us to sign the 1787 contracts for services known as the Federal Constitution, the Constitution for the United small u States of America. Now, I haven't looked at it in years, but when they revised the federal laws and re-annotated, numbered, and established code standing, I believe it was probably codified as Section 2565 of the Immigration and Naturalization Act. So anyway, All of that is in history books and in the law. You don't have to depend upon me for that. You can look it up for yourselves. Each one of the federal subcontractors, American, British, and Holy Roman Empire, had their own citizenship attached to it. All of these citizens were operating in international jurisdiction. None of them were operating in national jurisdiction. The only ones operating in national jurisdiction were the American people with a small p. Even the state citizens were operating in international jurisdiction. And that is how they could form contracts with the federal vendors. All the federal vendors are operating in international jurisdiction. So in order for them to have a contract to provide services to our states of the Union had to have people that were also operating in international jurisdiction. And so we find that the people who are operating as state citizens, simply capital S state, citizens, capital C, were those members of the state assembly who swore basically an allegiance to their state that was unique and singular, and who then embarked upon representing the interests of their state in international venues. So among the kinds of citizens, there were state citizens operating in international venues who were members of their state assembly. And they are the ones who actually formed the contract and signed off on the constitutional contracts with the service vendors, the federal service vendors. So you have 4 different kinds of citizen. You have state citizens, you have United States citizens written out, who were the original citizenry of the American Federal Republic. You have 𝗨.𝗬, capital C citizens that were British territorial citizens. And you have citizens of the United States that were municipal citizenry, part of the federal civil service. So you have citizens serving their state government. You had citizens serving the American Federal Republic, which has been inoperable since 1861. You had British territorial citizens, primarily serving in the armed services in some form or another. And you had the municipal citizenry that were those in the federal civil service. It should be apparent at this point that the state citizens are the ones that agreed to the constitutional service contracts, and the state citizens are therefore the only ones that can enforce the constitutions. We are very lucky now that our assemblies are assembled, that we have state citizens who are enabled and competent to enforce the federal constitutions. For many years, while our state assemblies were not in session, and when the American people were not self-identified and provenanced and declared and recorded, we could not bring forward state citizens to enforce these constitutional contracts, which is why our federal public employees found so many ways to evade their obligations and got away with so much. There was nobody on our side of the table to enforce the contract. And so our public employees took full advantage and ran like wild horses, doing whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted, and doing it in our name and under our flag, which is one of the objects of our objections set before the world right now, is that, for example, and this is just one example among hundreds of not thousands of examples, where Donald Trump is still flying our war flag, the Stars and Stripes, while he is on a commercial mercenary mission for foreign governments and should, by all rights, be flying the British Union jet. He's the president of the USA Incorporated. The USA Incorporated has been hired by Britain and Israel and other parties to go sack Iran. So he's got a commercial mercenary services organization, a corporation, calling itself the United States of America, which has a contract with us called the Constitution of the United States of America, that calls for these same mercenaries to defend our country. And he's lying through his teeth, saying that going and attacking Iran on this sidebar contract with other foreign governments, right, has something to do with our country's defense, which is a bald-faced lie. It really doesn't. It does nothing but cost us money and make us look like thugs. So he's still flying our war flag and making it look like we're attacking Iran when no such thing is happening. You see, it's all this deceitful business of pretending to be one thing and actually another, pretending to be working for the American government while actually working for the British government or the Roman government or the Israeli government. These public employees have gone into business for themselves. And yeah, they have this one big contract with us called the Constitution of the United States of America, but they've accepted all kinds of work from other governments all over the world. Like I say, they've gone into business for themselves, and they're sidebarring their services to all these other governments, but they're still flying our flag, and they're still charging back their expenses to us. You see how crooked this is? You see how evil this is? You see how you're being socked right in the pocketbook and everywhere else to fund this, and how you are being mischaracterized and misrepresented as a member of an aggressive nation that is creating all of this devastation and carnage. We are being blamed for a foreign mercenary service taking a contract with these other governments and continuing to fly our flag and continuing to try to justify charging us for their expenses on the job. That's why we put out the international public notice concerning this, telling the world that no, we're not at war with Iran. No, we didn't hire Trump to go over there and sack Iran for us. No, we did not give him permission or authorize him to do any such thing. Our contract clearly states declarations of war by Congress. This is a mercenary operation that has been undertaken as a separate contract by the USA Inc. for foreign governments. And if Mr. Trump is going to accept foreign mercenary contracts from quote unquote Great Britain, he can jolly well fly the Union Jack and make it clear who the devils are. Make it clear that it's the Brits who are doing all this. Make it clear that he is working for the Brits in a mercenary capacity Make it clear that it has nothing to do with the American people or our country whatsoever, or our defense whatsoever. That's the honest thing to do. Strike the Title IV flag, take down the stars and stripes, put up the Union Jack, and admit who you're really working for. Admit, show at the masthead who's causing all the problems. Show who your client is. It sure as hell isn't us. We did not allow or permit any president to declare war. Nothing in any of the federal constitutions even hints at allowing a commander-in-chief to declare war. So, this is all a very terrible situation in which our country is being blamed for aggression against Iraq because one of our federal service vendors is taking a sidebar contract from foreign governments to act as a mercenary service and go do the dirty work for these foreign countries, and is still flying our flag, giving the world the impression that he's doing this for us and at our behest. That's why the international public notice had to be written. That's why we have to stand up and say, no, not us. This is the fault of the Brits. And furthermore, the Brits have been in charge of the Iranian government since 1908. So if the Iranians are terrorists and they are funding terrorism, it means that the Brits are terrorists and they are funding terrorism, because there's no way in hell that any of the Iranian governments since 1908 have existed without the direct support of the British. The British have been responsible for every change of government in Iran since 1908. So one of the things that I find most cloying about this situation is that people think, oh, the Iranian government was killing its own people. No, the British government was killing Iranians using their puppet ayatollahs. Those ayatollahs got their position the same way that the European monarchs got their crowns. So, all of this extremism, all of this violence, all of it was ordered by the Brits. And now, just as they took down the Shah like a, discarded carnival prop and put the Ayatollahs in command, now they're going in and paying Trump to do the dirty work to remove the Ayatollahs that they put in power. And God only knows what will come next. Mr. Trump made this announcement telling the Iranian people, well, get ready because we're going to come in and destroy everything and kill however many people and leave your country in ruins, and you're going to be responsible for picking up the pieces. And oh, by the way, we're not going to help you with any of that at all because we're washing our hands right here in public. It was like Pontius Pilate washing his hands for all of the destruction that he was going to participate in as the commander-in-chief of this mercenary services corporation called the USA Inc. And he was telling the Iranian people that, no, hell no, I'm not going to help you afterward, and I'm not going to pay for any of the damages. So you're just going to have to figure out what to do on your own. It was said with all the cynicism of Abraham Lincoln making the Emancipation Proclamation, emancipating the Southern slave owners from their legal responsibility to provide shelter and food and clothing for their slaves. A completely despicable, cynical, self-interested, venal act that people will stupidly, ignorantly applaud. You cannot.
We just hit the 7 o'clock mark, boss.
Okay. Yes, sir. You're getting late. I've had quite a rant here. I see it's time for us to go. Shannon?
I'm here.
So,
All right, we can try to get to questions next week. This week, someone wound you up, apparently.
yeah, I've been pretty wound up by a war in Iran, especially when you consider that they're destroying a civilization that far predates ours, that they are destroying priceless artifacts, that they are destroying some of the finest mathematicians and physicists on the planet. Yes, I'm wound up, and they're doing it in our name, using our flag and intending to charge the cost of this to us. Yes, I'm wound up. I am fully wound up. I am absolutely disgusted by what they're doing and what they're trying to pull. So, anyway, I've given you all quite a history lesson. If you just save this particular broadcast, you'll have a synopsis of everything that's gone on, and you'll have a lot of definitions at your beck and call. And I hope you make good use of all this information, because the time is coming when more and more people need to hear it. Okay, those who have questions, join us for the coordinator's call on Thursday. I'll get through as many as I can. Otherwise, send me an email. I'll do my best. And with that, I will wish you all a fond good evening, a good week ahead. Keep the faith. Never, ever, ever give up. Always think of what you want and keep focused on what is positive, good, and true. And with that thought, I will see you next week, God willing, at the same time, same place. And I'm here
Here we
working for you.
go. All right, goodbye, everybody. See you next week.